I had no business doing what I was doing. I was 23 years old. I had 6 months of experience and I was signing pretty big brands because it was a bit of the one-eyed man is king thing. Like I was providing a real service. I was providing value. I feel proud of that. But compared to today, I mean, it was so unsophisticated. It was just that no one knew anything about Amazon.
Welcome to another episode of Intentwise Connect podcast, where we bring to you educational, informative, and hopefully thought provoking content around all things Amazon, Walmart, and e commerce. Today's topic is entrepreneurship, especially around growing agency businesses. And entrepreneurship itself as a topic is very near and dear to me. I've been on a journey of my own for some time, and I've learned now that the journey is both a difficult and a rewarding one that teaches you a lot. And my guest today is someone who has successfully gone through this process. His name is John Ghiorso. He was a founder and CEO of Orca Pacific, a full service Amazon and e-commerce agency. He built the business from two people back in 2008, right, John? uh,
Correct. Yep.
and then eventually successfully exiting in 2020. So today we'll be learning from his experience of scaling an agency business. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm eager to get into it.
Awesome. Well, first things first, we were supposed to record this, have this chat last week, but I know you sent me a note saying you're at the ER with your daughter. So how is she doing now? I hope she's feeling better.
I appreciate you asking. Yeah, my 2-year-old daughter is fine. She pulled a Evil Knievel impression and rode a tricycle down about 10 steps. She broke her arm. Honestly, it could have been worse. So we actually feel pretty fortunate that that's all that happened. But she's good. She has a pink cast and she's doing fine. And kids heal very quickly, so they think in
Totally.
like another 3 weeks she'll just be back to 100%. So anyway, I appreciate you asking, but yeah, that's always like drop everything, go into crisis mode, and then resume when you're back. So
Yeah. Thank you to their resilience, though. They
yeah,
recover
yeah,
fast. I
yep,
have two grown daughters, but I've been through my my share of
I'm
episodes.
sure. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so John, let's dive in. I'm going to dial back to 2008, which is when you started this business. Share with us your founding story, if you don't mind.
yeah, yeah. So I have kind of a weird founding story. In some ways, I kind of had it easy in terms of starting a company. Long story short, so I graduated college in 2008. It was the Great Recession. I could not find a job, and I didn't want to starve. So I kind of reluctantly went to work for my late dad's company. He had a small lifestyle business that, if anyone knows, was a manufacturer's rep firm, which is kind of an outdated concept today, but it had kind of a moment in time, provided a great life for my family growing up. It was very profitable. It was just small. He had just started to become kind of interested in Amazon, and some of the clients he had become interested in Amazon. I mean, keep in mind, this is 2008. So Amazon is kind of just up and coming. It's not even in most product categories at this point. I jumped in and I realized that there was a way to basically pitch consumer product companies on the idea of getting their vendor central accounts set up and filling out their NIS forms. So that was the service. So for
No
e-commerce
advertising.
people, no, advertising didn't exist. Content actually barely existed at that point. I mean, like more like A+ content, it was just starting to kind of come online. So yeah, so basically I figured out that you could kind of do this as a service. It was actually kind of hard to access. I had a background of door-to-door sales in college, and pretty quickly realized that if I could get a couple clients, I could get more than that. I started going to trade shows and kind of ran a door-to-door sales-esque playbook, which sounds super hacky, but keep in mind I was 22, and it was basically a kind of a hustle. I talked to thousands of brands a year in aggregate, and I think I closed about 20 a year, and then I signed another 20 and another 20. Pretty quickly realized that if I was setting their products up, then they needed help with marketing and they needed help with content. And, kind of before I knew it, it was that kind of classic like accidental agency owner thing. Once I had a handful of clients, spun the thing off as my own, bought out my dad, and went kind of all in on Amazon. And then basically over the next 10 years, built a full service Amazon agency. Of course, when ads came online, that was a big part of our business. Uh, got more strategic, more sophisticated, hired a bunch of specialists, and ended up with about 100-person full service agency. That then in 2020, I exited, sold to S4 Capital, Media Monks, now just called Monks. But I could talk about kind of the rest of that journey, but that's the starting and the 10-year scaling, about as compressed as I can make it.
Great story. I mean, I entered the space, when ads was up and about, and we're really talking optimization. You're talking about much before that. Curious about the competitive landscape back then. Like, were you just shooting fish in a barrel, or
Pretty much.
what?
Pretty much. Yeah. It was, trust me, I dream of those days, in terms of, how, I mean, it wasn't easy in the sense that nothing's easy, right? I
Yeah,
put in lots of hours, and of course, like anyone would, but it was, compared to today, even compared to 5 years ago, it was
yeah,
pretty easy. I mean, I had no business doing what I was doing. I was
yeah,
23 years old. I had 6 months of experience, and I was signing pretty big brands, because it was a bit of the one-eyed man is king thing. Like I was providing a real service. I was providing value. I feel proud of that. But compared to today, I mean, it was so
yeah,
unsophisticated. It was just that no one knew anything about Amazon. I think for people that weren't around back then, the other thing to keep in mind is that unlike today, I would say the majority of consumer product brands were very hesitant to get on the
mm,
platform at all. They saw Amazon as, a discounter, as kind of sketchy, as they were really worried about their other retail partners and their perception, of getting on Amazon. They were worried about Amazon messing up their pricing and map
yeah,
policy. So there was a lot of, both imagined and legitimate concern that frankly I had to overcome just to get them even to the point where they were considering getting on the platform, and then convince them that, we were the
you can do
ones to
more.
partner with. That being said, I think I could count the competitors on one hand at
Yeah,
that point.
yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking the opposite. Brands are sitting here and thinking like, you're pitching to them, and they're thinking like, I've got nothing to lose. Let's go try. I guess the guardrails were much higher, and
It
it makes sense looking
Yeah,
back.
it was this interesting combination of, uh interest and excitement and fear all kind of wrapped up, because the opportunity for me, for the agency, existed because it wasn't obvious, it wasn't straightforward, there wasn't a clear path. That's what made it hard. And in that kind of difficulty and concern, there was an opportunity to professionalize it and add a services layer.
Got it.
Um, but but yeah, it was a weird world now. Amazon is obviously a household name and one of the biggest companies in the world, and of course, you're going to be on Amazon with a few exceptions, right? With some maybe kind of D2C zealots, but other than that, it's just a standard part of the playbook now, and it just wasn't back then.
Yeah, and if you look at the partner directory today, there's some 2,000 companies providing
Yeah,
services.
yeah. I
So
I was curious the
growing.
other day. I looked up, uh, Amazon advertising as a service on, Clutch, and
Ah,
there were 3,000 names in the US.
yeah, yeah, and it continues to grow. And I want to talk about growth a little bit here. So you shared your kind of, let's call it the first playbook, door to door sales, but I'm sure it has evolved. What So talk to me about that evolution of the growth playbook, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
And partly because this is like top of mind topic for most agency owners
yeah.
today.
So, I didn't systematize growth for a while, right? I was kind of a one man show in terms of the growth side of the business. I hired a bunch of delivery people, but I was like the salesperson up
Yeah,
until the middle seven figures in ARR. It was like me. Um, and to be honest, I think that was a mistake. I think I left money on the table. I, at the time, saw the relatively wild success I was having from a growth perspective as representative of me, right? Like when you're in your 20s, you're like, oh, I'm just an amazing salesperson. This is like I'm crushing it. And I'm an okay salesperson, but the reality of that situation was there was just so much demand and so little supply that it was, it was pretty easy. There was a ton of inbound referrals. And in hindsight, what I should have done is hired a sales team of 10 people and built a company that's, was 50 times bigger.
Yeah.
Hindsight being 2020. But when I did eventually start kind of systematizing growth, oh, man, there's so many different topics to go in here. But I realized a couple things. One, agency growth can be systematized, which I think even that is kind of a mindset shift for a lot of agency founders. Agencies are weird businesses because they almost all have very large TAMs. If an agency has 50 clients, usually it's representative of a TAM of 10,000 plus companies that could be their clients, even inside of the ICP.
Yeah.
Yet most agencies, when they're, let's say they have 50 clients, their goal is to kind of add 10 more clients, right? Their goal is 20% growth. And I actually find that odd, that an agency could be in a situation where they have a fraction of a percent of the TAM, and they're not saying, okay, we have half a percent. How do we get 20% of this market?
Yeah.
Because they could. There's no physical law that says that an agency can't capture that much volume. But you have to do what I think SaaS businesses are much better at this, where they look at the entire TAM and they look at budget and they kind of work backwards and they, endeavor to capture a significant portion of the entire market, or at a minimum communicate and reach and touch a significant portion of the market, if not the entire thing. So one, just knowing that it can be systematized and kind of starting with the end in mind and working backwards.
Yeah.
And then I can go into kind of the specific levers that I use and that I think are still kind of very relevant and actually arguably even more relevant today and amplified. But I want to take a breath and make sure we want to go that direction.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I certainly have a couple of follow-on questions on that topic, but I do want to talk about the point you raised, which is, you look at the agency TAM, and in my mind, I look at agency TAM. Let's just take it from an advertising perspective. Very rough ballpark numbers, right? So Amazon is making about 50 billion in ad sales. Assuming agency fees are about 10% of that, so that's 5 billion. Just, I mean, I've been very generous, but these are reasonably big TAMs, right?
Yep.
And to your question about like why don't companies chase that on the SaaS side, and we are a SaaS business and we get a lot of investment interest. There's definitely access to capital on the SaaS side, um, which just seems a bit easier than a services business. Is I assume, because I've never
Correct.
been in that situation.
Correct.
Is it an access to capital issue, or is it that the very nature of the founders getting into these businesses aren't really aiming to build these massive high growth uh, revenue multiple led businesses? What do you think it is?
Yeah. So I think it's both. Almost all agencies are bootstrapped. Therefore, you have to be very deliberate about what dollars you have available to spend on growth, how you're going to spend them, and it has to be really efficient deployment of those dollars.
Yeah,
So you can't just throw money at it. Frankly, even in a SaaS environment, that's harder than it was a couple of years ago, but
100%.
still, it's bootstrapped. Two, I think it's a mindset thing for sure. And the mindset stems from, I think, just kind of lack of uh like in SaaS, it's just like the playbook is, of course, you get as big as you can, as fast as you can. It's just sort of in the water. And it's just not in the agency world. I think a big part of that too is that agencies don't scale, not in the way that SaaS companies do. That doesn't mean they can't grow. They can absolutely grow and they can grow very quickly, but they don't have the benefits of scale because, for every 5 clients you onboard, you have to hire a new person. And there's no place in which you break out of that. I mean, you look
Yeah,
at typical agency kind of headcount economics, they're roughly the same at WPP as they are at, a 100-person agency. You just
sure.
have so much revenue, you need so many people. I think there's a general kind of hesitance towards hyperscaling that, well, if you hyperscale, you're going to break delivery. Like
Yep.
it's just, you can only onboard so many people and so many clients at once before quality starts to diminish, and then you have the opposite problem, which is, you have kind of this death spiral. That is a real concern for agencies, but I also think it's not. Um, it can be overcome with proper systemization of delivery.
Yeah.
I know that because I did it, right. Like we grew at 100+% from a 7-figure base. Um, I think a couple years, like, and it was hard. It was it was redlining the business, but we did fine. Clients were happy. There's always some churn. Anyway, so I think that it's those kind of two, and then uh, two B reasons. There's others as well, but those are the big ones. Again, it makes it harder,
Yeah.
right? But it can be done.
Yeah. So talk to him about the path you took, right? So in your case, did the margins of the business fund all investments, or did you raise any working capital? And I asked that question from the lens of all the agency owners that may be listening to this too, right? What would your guidance and advice be around managing capital? Because
Yep.
I think this tension of just trying to grow from margins, and then you've got some churn going on that hurts the ability to invest. It's a constant tension for the founders. How do you? Is there a pressure release tactic that you would recommend from a capital standpoint?
So we never raise money, but I have a point of view on raising money, um, deploying outside capital in general in agencies, which I'll share in a minute. But I want to be clear: we never raised money. We had very high margins. Um, I think every agency should strive. I think when they're young, they should be shooting for a 60 to 70% plus delivery margin.
Yeah.
I think when they're scaled, so say like, into the 7 figures, they have a management layer. I think they should be shooting for 50 to 60%. And
Yeah.
that should roll down to 25 to 40% net margin. Um, and then, in my opinion, they should take what would have been the net margin if things were running kind of normally, um, and sustainably. And they should reinvest some of that back into growth. So, and if you do that in that way, you're still setting up for a profitable business, because you can always just kind of normalize that overinvestment and create more of a standard investment, but you can significantly increase top line growth by doing that in a way that doesn't fundamentally kind of misbuild the business. Because a lot of agency founders, they undershoot delivery margin, and then what they realize is they've built a business that's just fundamentally not profitable enough,
Yeah.
because now that's really hard to unwind. You're either undercharging clients, which means you have to raise all your prices, which is obviously very hard, or you're over servicing clients and they're used to a certain service, and then you have to kind of roll that back, which is also very hard. So like that's a big problem to unwind. So from the beginning, or even if it's a pivot, try to go for healthy delivery margins. But then from there, um, I think the plan I just laid out should
Yeah.
be kind of plan A. Plan B, if there's a very clear path towards profitable, healthy, sustainable growth. You have relatively low churn, meaning the clients you do on board are going to have a high LTV.
Yeah.
You have an established, healthy CAC, and then the ratio between them is sustainable. You have a pretty rapid CAC payback period. Then I think taking kind of short-term outside money can be appropriate.
Yeah.
Whether that's debt or, depends on more like from a founder where you're at in terms of how you structure it. But
Yeah.
um, if you're really confident that you have a money printing machine, I mean, yes, I think you should find, outside cash to put in the machine. But honestly, that's the only situation in which I'd recommend taking outside money. And that is like a very specific use case. Otherwise, I never did it. Of course, I won't name names. I saw a lot of other agencies that raised money one way or another, and it rarely worked out. The only time it did work out, and I think this is very hard, it has been done a couple times, is when basically they were pivoting to become a technology company or a SaaS company. And they were kind of in the process of that and basically raised money to kind of grow that side of the business. By the way, that's not for the faint of heart. There's a whole, trail of bodies that have tried to do that, but it's been done a couple times. Stackline did it successfully. A few others.
Yeah, that's actually a topic I want to peel a couple of layers on later in our
Yeah,
conversation. Um, but yeah, but there's a couple of data points here that I think are super important to remember. So you talked about 60 to 70% delivery margin, um, and then 25 to 40% net margin. That creates enough of a healthy cash flow to be investing sufficiently in growth. The other thing you mentioned, which is like, and I've seen this quite a bit, is um, not pricing right, and there is a downward spiral from there. You just don't have enough happening in the business to get out of that hole. And so it just sounds like getting pricing right, uh, perhaps not bowing to too much of the competitive pressure and giving up those delivery margins, but that also leads to the need for a really dialed in understanding of your ideal customer profile and what you are delivering to them and what value you're extracting.
correct. I think two things allow you to actually go out and get strong delivery margins. Because anyway, it's easy for me to say, oh, just charge more. Well, sure. Yeah, right. Thank you. It's not really great advice on its own. So I think two things kind of ladder into that. One is you've got to bet on the right horse at the right time. Um, I was successful with Orca because I started an Amazon agency in 2008. That was the single biggest
Mhm.
factor in my success was timing. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that anyone could have done it because, there were others that started around the same time and were successful. There were others that started around the same time as me and are dramatically more successful. So, so I was middle of the road. But honestly, that everything is easier or everything is harder depending on the domain you bet on and the time in which you bet on that domain. Because like all things in services, there is no IP here, not really. There's no real moat. So what happens, what you're relying on is a market misalignment. You're relying on the fact that something has happened relatively quickly in the market that has created more demand for an expertise than there is supply. And that will last for a certain amount of time. And then the window will close. And now you can reinvent yourself over and over and over. And that's called innovation. And you absolutely should be doing that. Otherwise, whatever you're doing is a flash in the pan. But know that the thing you're selling today, that is, even if you get this right, that window will close in 2 years. So it's about finding the right opportunity to bet on, the right kind of macro trend to bet on, and reinventing yourself over and over and over as that trend plays out. That is the most important thing. Two, and this is the point you made, offering services that add a level of strategic value and kind of exceptionalism that does not put you in a situation where someone is just looking to say, I need these tasks done and I can either do them internally or do them externally.
Yeah.
If you're the equivalent of an oil change place, meaning everyone's kind of knows how to change oil and you could do it yourself, but you just decide, it's easier to drive my car down the road. That is a terrible place to be in from an agency. You need to be doing something that is either done in a way or inherently in and of itself is exclusive, privileged, unique. And then, in my opinion, not every agency does this, and some are successful without it. You need to do everything you can to draw a line between that work and results, especially in 2024. It can't be brand and
Yeah.
fuzzy, and I mean, it can. There's whole creative industry still kind of operating that way, but in my opinion, you need to tie what you're doing to actual tangible results. It's self-funding, you're paying for yourself. That's kind of the holy grail of components that allow you to, I don't want to say charge whatever you want, but absolutely charge a premium for your service. And also, really important side benefit, create a lot of stickiness with your clients as well,
Mm.
which obviously everything is easier when your clients are staying around and churn is low.
And I want to come back to this stickiness bit in a moment. I do want to go back to the topic about growth, John. In terms of the actual levers that paid dividends for you in the later half of
Yep.
the Orca journey, what would those be? Any light you can shed on that?
Yeah. So two big things. and I still think they're relevant today, although they've changed. Um, One is my personal brand, and then the personal brand of other thought leaders internally
Yeah.
at Orca. So it wasn't. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't just the me show. I never wanted that. I tried not to build that. Yes, I was the leader and the owner of the organization, but we had really powerful voices outside of myself.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing there is um, these were voices from individual people. We were not leading with the corporate brand. We were leading with people that had a personality and a profile and credibility and obviously good communication skills, and they were domain experts. And then we just pumped out organic content.
Mm.
That worked, in 2017, and it still very much works today. LinkedIn was the number one place we did that. I still think it's the number one opportunity. But I also think X is an opportunity. I think YouTube is an opportunity. I think podcasts like this one are a big opportunity.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of different ways to kind of approach that, but basically, founder and executive led thought leadership and content marketing. So that was number one in my opinion in kind of 2024 agency growth. It's still number one. Um, should I go into number two, or do you want to
Yes.
dive into that one a bit more?
No, I
Okay.
mean, it's even as a SaaS business too. I mean, that tactic has played and continued uh, pay a lot of dividends for us here at Intentwise
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Especially, and I think it's not easy. You have to systematize a lot of things. You also need to have things to say, but um, but I couldn't agree with you more. And then I think this is, I mean, it isn't. This is a narrative now I'm hearing from thought leaders, not just those who are building agency businesses, even SaaS businesses. I mean, if you look at CAC and customer acquisition costs, the average SaaS company is paying $4 to acquire $1 in ARR today.
Yeah. That's
So,
it's a problem. Yeah.
yes, it's a
Yeah.
slight problem.
Yeah.
But couldn't agree with you more on this. Um, and then I think what I keep saying is like, hey, number one part of this is build that depth of some sort, so you have something differential and useful to say. And number two, like with many things, there is a process. You need a team. You need
Yep.
certain skills, but you have to invest in them. And I also think it doesn't play out tomorrow.
Yeah.
It just is a
Yeah.
slightly longer term investment.
Yeah. I think those are all really important points. For most people who are founding a business or executives inside of a business, it's hard not to develop a good worldview. I mean, you're literally spending the majority of your waking hours doing this thing. So unless you're just really dense, which I don't think most people are, you're going to have good ideas. I think the second point is actually the hardest part, which is how do you systematically extract and deploy those ideas? Because if you're a founder or executive, obviously you have a lot of other stuff to do. So and we could go into a whole thing there, but I totally agree. So number two, we use this. I still think the opportunity is huge, but it has to be done the right way. Is outbound messaging, but in a way that is highly contextual, highly customized,
Yeah.
human, and value additive. Meaning, take spam and then go 180 degrees in the opposite direction. And that's what I'm talking about. So, everything that spam is not. Basically, founder-led sales and founder-led messaging works incredibly well. Why? Because the founder is the most credible voice. They're probably the best salesperson. They just it's a full package. The problem is it doesn't scale, right? Like any company beyond, I don't know, 10 people or SaaS, a million or two in ARR, it just breaks. It's just you're
Yeah.
one person and then you have even more responsibility outside of growth. I believe that founder, executive, and even individual, AE led, uh, scaled messaging is going to almost entirely replace SDR teams. And I think that's actually starting to run its course now. Now, at Orca, we use kind of a beta version of this because the technology wasn't where it is today. It was more, frankly, manual. Um, but there are now capabilities and playbooks that allow a company who's sophisticated from a technology standpoint, and I would say also sophisticated from a strategic standpoint to scale this highly value additive outbound messaging. And if done in the right way, again, I'll caveat that because if you do this in the wrong way, it's a massive waste of time. It'll literally get zero results. But if done in the right way, it can be the single highest ROI activity because unlike most marketing activities, it doesn't cost money every time you do it, right? Like you're talking
Marginal
about
cost is zero.
exactly. You're sending emails, you're sending direct messages. So it's really about everything that's upstream of that. The sending itself is somewhat straightforward.
So personal branding, thought leadership, that all is one bucket, and then very contextual, targeted outbound messaging. I like the anything but spam, especially these days. All this AI generated stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to have to stand out. Awesome points. The other topic I wanted to go back to is I'm going to bring a couple of topics together. You talked about capital raise and when do you raise capital. Over the last 3-4 years, I've seen a number of agencies raise capital, especially from private equity groups. There's one common pattern I've seen, John, among them, which is they have some sort of an internal technology platform. It
Hmm.
has a name, it is part of their overall story, perhaps adds to their valuation. But this is when I want to dive into a topic that you've been talking about a lot, which is how should agencies think about technology, or how, and also how should they not think about technology, what not to do in helping scale the business.
Yeah. So before I say this, I will just note that there are always exceptions to every rule, right? And I myself could point to exceptions and argue, I could steel man this the other way. But I will say, with a few exceptions, notable ones, um, I think that agencies should absolutely be building internal technology and should absolutely not be building external facing technology. Let me rephrase that second part. It should be external facing in the sense that it's part of your service and clients see it, but they should not be trying to build SaaS that spins off from their internal tech.
Yeah.
So, on kind of the first part, I think it's creates a huge amount of value for an agency to take the expertise that they've built and to kind of force multiply that via internal tech. If done right, it adds more value to clients, which therefore creates more stickiness, harder to leave if you're getting a better service and you're getting a tool or tech stack that comes along with it that if you leave, that also leaves, right? From the
Yeah.
client perspective. It increases multiples. If you do exit, it should also increase internal efficiency, meaning you just need less people to complete a task. I mean, there's multiple benefits of doing this. Um, I think there are just as many reasons not to attempt to take that product you've built and create a SaaS tool out of it. The other thing I'll say in general about this, it's really important to be agnostic. Agencies will build tools upstream of SaaS because they're closer to the market and they'll be able to innovate faster. And they should absolutely use that to their advantage. But they should also understand that the economics of building an agency and the economics of building SaaS are fundamentally different. And there will be a point in time where a SaaS company who is infinitely better resourced comes along and out innovates your internal tool. And
Yeah.
at that point, you cannot fall into the sunk cost fallacy. You have to pivot and use the external tool because you will say, oh, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this and we innovated it over 2 years and everyone loves it and it's important. Yes, and if a SaaS tool is now better and all your competitors have access to it, you will immediately be behind. Now, the goal would be to innovate to a point where I would say it becomes kind of a bit of both, right? You have the external tool and the internal tool, and they work in tandem. And maybe there's a little bit of marketing here where you're packaging some of the external stuff up in tandem and putting a front end on it and making it look a little
Yeah.
more proprietary than it maybe is, right? So a little bit of this is marketing and salesmanship, but I just think it's critical to be agnostic and to ultimately stitch together what is best for your clients and what adds the most value.
Yeah. It's the point you made about, you know, staying detached, and when external tool sets come along that are doing better than what you've got, moving on. It is such a critical point because it keeps burning a hole in your pocket, and it keeps reducing your value prop to your clients, right? So,
Yep.
and yet I personally have seen so many instances where they eventually come to that point because they're forced into it, but they've spent a lot of time, uh, where they could have saved money and time if they made that decision earlier and just moved on.
Yep. Exactly. And I
Mhm.
think I think the agency game in general and with technology, but just in general, is one of knowing whatever you're doing today and building today, it will be commoditized in 2 or 3 years. It
True.
just will be. It's just if you just have to, and this goes for your services and your tech and your approach and your worldview, everything. It
Yeah.
just has to be it's a game of constant reinvention, and it's a race to be a little bit better than your competitor, because there's never going to be a winner take all dynamic here. This is not Uber and it's not Facebook and it's not
No.
it's a services business where you win on the margins, and it's about working harder and innovating faster and, adding more value to your clients and just continuing to do that over and over and over again, and if you do that, you'll win.
The other point I just want to add is, I mean, I'm personally fully bought in this idea of building tech between those gaps that currently are not serviced. Um, Also, to get it right, you want to have people overseeing the project, whether it's internal or external, uh, that understand how to oversee a tech project in the sense that there's a certain time and money you have to be committed to, right, in deploying. And if you have not done it before, seek some external guidance or advisors who can help, because there's just so many ways tech projects have gone wrong. So you want to be watchful of that, especially when all of that investment is from your margins.
Yep.
So that's just the other point I want to make. Like, I would not underestimate what it takes to get it right, even if it is for internal purposes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's probably a thin analogy, but it's kind of like building a house or something. Like, you gotta, if you've never done it, you're gonna run into some problems. But at a minimum, you need a contractor you can trust, unless
Yep.
you happen to be a craftsman yourself. I mean, because the reality is the vast majority of agency founders are not technical. So you need, I agree, you need a trusted, and whether that's another agency or an internal person, you need a trusted translator between the actual project and the work and like your kind of, vision for it. Because otherwise it's just you just never know what's actually happening, or is this timeline fair, or it got delayed and I don't know why, and am I getting hosed, and yeah.
Well, so you built this business, John. You got acquired in 2020. Can you unpack that moment or the decision? Was it accidental? Were you running a formal process? Um, and
It
along
was
the way, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, it was it was a formal process that got short circuited by COVID, basically.
I see.
Yeah. So we were going to go to market in 2021, long story short. And then we were sort of starting to put feelers out and starting to put, a marketing deck together and get our house in order. And then COVID happened, and it was like the world was ending. And then 6 weeks later, everyone was like, oh, actually, maybe this is good for our business. That's weird. Like, I know it's obvious now that e-commerce shot up, but at the
Yep.
time, anyone who lived through this was like, it was pretty scary from a
Yep.
business standpoint for a couple weeks there. But
March 17th to April 1st.
yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And then a bunch of buyers all of a sudden just
That's right.
came out of the woodwork, and we picked one and went from there.
Got you. So you've been in the space long enough, seen multiple transitions. Any point of view on how you see the landscape over the next 5 years, especially from an agency perspective?
In e-commerce or an agency overall?
Uh, I would say a combination, agency in e-commerce.
A lot of people aren't going to really want to hear me say this, but I think that it's going to be really tough. Not impossible, just tough. Um, if you already have a scaled, profitable, healthy business, great. I think the incumbents are going to be the winners in 5 years. I'd be surprised if there's any upstart commerce agencies that that do well. It's possible there might be a few. I think the industry is partway through, maybe the majority of the way through a maturation cycle. So consolidation, um, coordination with non-commerce functions, right? Coordinating a commerce team with a creative
Sure.
team, with an overall paid team, with an influencer team. Companies that do that well, and there are many that are stitching this together, potentially even fully deployed as we speak. I think those are going to be the winners. There's certainly still some independent owned shops that are doing well. A lot of them, though, already have some pretty serious momentum, and and I think they'll absolutely kind of continue that. But even those folks, my general recommendation is like you should be selling in the next 5 years, unless you're really going to say like we're going to be one of the big ones.
True.
Like we're a 100-person agency, we're going to be at 2,000 in 5 years. Great. If not, I think you want to partner up,
Yeah.
uh, because it's kind of everyone's still a lot of people are still looking for a dance partner, but at some point, like all those capabilities will be filled at the mid-size and big agencies,
Yeah.
and the independent guys left are going to get really squeezed.
Sure.
Um, I think that's how it's going to play out over the next 5 years. There's still a ton of disruption and innovation and other things that are going to continue to shake up commerce. Commerce is not going anywhere as it's currently structured. It's only going to get bigger and more important.
Yep.
Um, uh, but everyone's paying attention now.
Sure.
Whatever kind of little niche and opportunity, and a lot of that is cooked. That being said, like I think in-store retail media is way underappreciated right now. I think you could absolutely build an agency from like starting from zero right now in that space and do really well.
Yep.
Influencer, the connection between commerce and influencer, I still think is fairly undefined and open. So there's certainly some like components of commerce, but like just kind of core platform commerce, like what Orca did. Yeah, I think it's if you've got momentum, keep going, but like start to look for an
Yeah.
exit.
And we touched on this earlier, like the number of agencies in the partner directory keeps growing, right?
Yeah.
So, what would your advice be? What would you tell current agency owners that are thinking about growth, thinking about exits, over the next couple of years?
Um, yeah, I would say, figure out what the number is for you that's gonna like you're gonna be happy with, and it needs to be achievable, right? Like an achievable number in the next 2 or 3 years in terms of like the total economic value of the deal. If you're under 10 million in revenue, you're at probably, let's say you're in the seven figures, you're somewhere between a probably 6 and 12x EBITDA multiple. I know that's a pretty big range, but a bunch of factors play into that.
Yep.
If you're over 10 million, you could be at a 10, 12, even 12 plus, depending on how big you are, EBITDA multiple. Um, so kind of figure that out, work backwards, make sure, I'll list a couple things that I think are all relevant here. Have a good, diversified executive team. When I say diversified, I mean both like diverse, but
Yeah.
also like diverse in terms of skill sets and worldviews. And like you need a team of adults
Yeah.
because you don't want the buyer to think everything just hinges on you as the founder. If you leave or get hit by a bus, the agency collapses. You want like a good bench. Um, you want to have everything kind of operationalized, SOPs. Like you want the business to be more than just like a group of people doing stuff. Like it should be really structured and organized. A savvy buyer will look for that. Internal tech, see previous comments. I think that's important. That's going to bump up your multiple for sure. Again, it provides more IP and stickiness and other things to a buyer. Um, Basic stuff like, make sure you're audited financials, gap compliant, like no legal weird, things hanging out there, buttoned up employee contracts and client contracts, and no one's going to sue you, that kind of stuff. Um, and then, and then get a good investment banker.
Yeah.
They charge a lot of money and they're worth it in my experience if you get a good one. Because everything flows through them. They've done this hundreds of times. You've done it 0 times probably, and it's going to be the first time. So, eat your own cooking, and that you should outsource expertise, like outsource your expertise too. someone who's done this a bunch of times. That would be my advice. And then continue to focus on running your business because it can be very distracting to sell a company. And if you take your eye off the ball and things start to get shaky,
It shows up.
yeah, all the buyers are going to see it. And then all of a sudden your value gets cut by a lot because you lose that kind of
Yeah,
trajectory and momentum and everything else. So,
that's great points, John. I know you are figuring out your next thing. So what's next for you, John?
yeah, so I'll tease it a little bit. I have been, as you can probably tell, I've been uh I've gotten kind of really ingrained recently in middle market growth, especially
Mm.
for service businesses. I did that for my company, right? I was obviously an important piece of our growth strategy. It was always the most fun part of it. I know everyone thinks I'm like an e-commerce nerd, and in some ways I am, and I did that for 15 years, and it was great. But to be honest, the thing that really got me excited, the thing that I focused on, on weekends and in evenings, and was always growth for Orca.
Yeah,
That was always the thing I was really, really just fascinated intrinsically by. Um, I've been, having a lot of conversations, kind of diving back into that world in many ways, making sure my knowledge is still kind of up to date. And I'm going to be making a pretty big bet on go to market. I'll say that's kind of where I'll leave it for now because there's
sure.
no official announcement. Um, but I'm super excited about it. I'm excited to jump back into the entrepreneurial fray. I took a bit of time off, or at least shifted down several gears, and maybe that's for a different
Yeah.
podcast in terms of how that actually felt. Because I know everyone, in the entrepreneur game is working towards this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and then I'm
Yeah.
not complaining. These are champagne problems, but sometimes you get the pot of gold and then you're like, "Oh, all right." Like, okay, so now what?
Now what?
Like, now what do I do? So I went through that a little bit, and I'm coming out the other side of it here. Hopefully, I'll have an announcement in a few months.
That's awesome. Well, this has been incredible, John. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your journey with us. I sincerely wish you well in your next project, next endeavor. And I hope to see you around in San Diego. Hope San Diego is treating you well.
It's treating me very well. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast.